In this video, I'm going to talk about strength training for Kendo and Iaido. The old school thinking is that if you want to get better at Kendo, just do Kendo and a lot of it. In sports science, that's known as specificity. Of course, that's true, but unless you live in one of the Kendo hotspots, like Japan or Korea, then chances are you don't have the opportunity to train at your dojo every day of the week. And even if you do, there are two very good reasons to incorporate strength training into your routine. One is performance, and two is injury prevention. If you still believe that doing strength training makes you muscle-bound and slow, then you're holding on to very outdated notions of strength training. There's a huge body of evidence, both from the lab and among elite athletes in all kinds of sports, showing that strength training improves performance. Weight training that leads to the kind of bulking up you see in bodybuilders requires a very specialized regimen, including a very specific way to eat. For most athletes, especially women, it's actually quite difficult to bulk up that way, even when you're training with heavy weights. For example, take American track and field athletes Lolo Jones, a hurdler, and Allyson Felix, an Olympic gold medalist in the 200 meters. I'll put links in the description below to videos of both athletes doing weight training. I don't think anyone would argue that either woman is bulky or slow. Before I get into the specific kinds of moves you may want to try, let me define some terms. Simply put, strength is your ability to work against resistance. So if we're talking about a squat, if you can squat a heavier weight, then you're stronger. Power, on the other hand, is the ability to move that weight quickly. So there's an element of explosiveness in it. So if we're talking about a squat again, if you can jump higher from a squat, you have more power. So in an explosive activity such as Kendo, it's power that you're looking for. But here's the interesting thing that studies have shown. If you increase strength, you also increase power. And that relationship holds true until you become quite strong. In fact, weightlifters are known to have some of the best vertical jumps among all kinds of athletes. They're up there with volleyball players and basketball players. So if you just concentrate on increasing strength, that'll take you a long way, and it'll lay the groundwork for training for power. Using explosive moves such as plyometrics is a great way to increase power, but it also increases the risk of injuries if you aren't prepared for it. So you have to be a bit more careful when training for power. First, get warmed up by running on a treadmill or riding a stationary bicycle or doing an elliptical machine for at least 10 to 15 minutes. Getting warmed up is the best thing you can do to reduce the risk of injuries. And remember, don't do static stretching. Now, if you're a busy person, you don't have time to spend hours in the gym. So here's a routine with just 4 moves, all of them compound moves involving multiple joints that also engage the core. First is the squat. Second is the deadlift. Third is the pull-up. And fourth is the dip or push-up. The squat and the deadlift are complementary moves, one pushing, one pulling. Same goes for the pull-up and the dip, or the pull-up and the push-up. A word of caution. If you have an existing lower back injury, you should consult a sports doctor before you begin such a regimen. One test you can use to see if you can do a deadlift is something called the Sorensen test. If you cannot hold this position for more than a minute, then you might want to avoid deadlifts for now. I won't get too specific about how to do each of these moves because you can find a lot of videos and other resources online on how to do them properly. One thing that I'd like to recommend, however, is that for the squat in particular, use free weights, that is, a barbell. Free weights force you to use all the stabilizing muscles in your core, rather than using a machine that locks you into a particular range of motion. It's also a natural safety check to prevent you from lifting too heavy beyond your ability. For the pull-up or dip, for people who don't have a lot of upper body strength, you can start out with an assisted version, in which the machine supports part of the body weight during the exercise. If you have zero experience with free weight, you should get a friend or a personal trainer to give you some basics. As a point of reference, you should eventually be able to squat your own weight quite comfortably, whether you're a man or a woman. A classic set is called a 5x5, where you do 5 reps for 5 sets, or a 6x3, where you do 6 reps for 3 sets. Generally speaking, you want a weight that's heavy enough so that you can't do more than 6 reps per set. That's because if you can do more than 6 reps, then you're starting to train muscular endurance more than strength. Once you get some experience, you can try variations of these moves, such as the front squat instead of the back squat. Many trainers prefer the front squat because it forces you to keep your upper body more vertical. As you get older, strength training to prevent injuries becomes more and more important. It's especially true for people who started Kendo as adults, like myself, because we don't have the benefit of the lifelong physical adaptations as people who started Kendo as children. Strength training can also help people who do Iaido. If you're not familiar with Iaido, it may not seem very physically demanding, but if you've done an intensive 2-hour keiko, you'll know that it can be quite grueling in its own way. So you may want to consider adding strength training to your routine if you want your Iaido to be dynamic and to prevent injuries, especially with your knees. Among the 4 moves that I mentioned earlier, if I had to pick one, I would recommend the squat. This is an excellent move to strengthen a large number of muscle groups, including the ones that support your knees. And it's also great for ankle flexibility. If you can squat so that the tops of your thighs are at least horizontal and your heels remain in contact with the floor, that's great for your range of motion. The routine with 4 moves that I've described can be done in about 45 minutes, including the warm-up. And you can modify the routine to suit your needs or address injuries that you may be dealing with. A little bit of investment of your time and effort, even if it's only once a week, will go a long way to improving your performance in Kendo and Iaido and allow you to practice them injury-free.